be quite a few of those. So please bear with me. I didn't have time to watch all 225 of these players all the time, all year long. There were a lot of guys that were drafted that I have never heard of before, but so the small samples, I will be very, very clear about who those very, very small samples are about, and I will also be reading my notes based on what I read, what I watched of guys like Komarov. I mean, I saw a guy who's kind of rangy. He's really big. He's got decent fluidity on his feet, I thought, from watching him with Quebec. I was a little surprised that he got drafted, but I mean, if he fills out his frame and gets a lot more skilled and creative and deceptive, and I think if you also build on his shot, which I saw was kind of meh, maybe there could be something, but I also feel like he's one of these guys where you could say that about a ton of guys in the NHL draft. His results in terms of impacts on goals, both offensively and defensively, leaned more offensively, so his defensive catalyst percentage was 35%, so when he was on the ice at even strength, his team got scored on at even strength 35% less, and that number was under 2 goals against per 60 minutes at even strength. So that's pretty good. And I felt that he did contribute to that to a certain extent. But yeah, I was a little surprised that he got picked. And Jake Richard, I honestly can't remember now that I'm doing this live on camera. Another really young player like Lindgren. I watched him a bit early in the year and liked him a little bit, and I never really circled back all that much. He's, I think, a little lankier than his elite prospect stats. That's how I've seen it. But I found that he's a guy with soft hands. He receives passes really well, sends passes calmly and effectively really well around the ice. He's got a relatively decent shot as well with some skill that he can use to pull pucks around and change angles and everything. But I didn't really see a high-end, close-quarters skill guy with a ton of pace. Not really that awesome of a hockey player to watch, but he's got moments. And I think, he's one of these guys where you draft him, he's really young, and you just either send him back to the USHL next season or send him to college and just see where he's at in 3 or 4 years. While, obviously you want to be in communication and develop him a little bit, but I'm just saying, he's one of these guys where you see where he is in a few years. Gustav Karlsson was another one who I hadn't seen a ton of up until very recently. I saw bits and pieces of him over the year because I thought, who's this guy scoring a ton of goals in the under-20 league? He seemed to be a guy that I thought came off with really good sort of pre-shot skill and sort of problem solving in those small areas where he can get those goals in a variety of different ways from being in the right position at the right time, doing the right things. Like, he's not a guy where I saw him cutting hockey pucks in half from distance and just ripping pucks top shelf. But he's a well-rounded player that I don't think has anything that really sticks out. But he does anticipate play well. He creates space for himself in a few different ways that I like. With his hockey mind, he scored like he scored, and I feel like over time you get 4 years with European guys, so stash him in Europe and see what happens, and I could see some kind of a thing coming out of this guy based around the way he sees the game and how he generates his scoring. Okay, and then moving on to 202, they drafted a guy who scored a lot of points in junior in Sweden, just like Gustav Karlsson and Joel Radkovic-Berntsson. I watched him a lot because he was the most productive player on a not great for Lunda team, but they're a great program. And I wasn't really blown away when I was watching him. I mean, he's pretty big. He's pretty resilient on his feet in terms of fighting off pressure and getting to the net. But there wasn't really a ton that really blew me away. I got some questions about him over the year. It feels like there's some folks out there who may look at statistics and production and go, why isn't anyone talking about this guy? And I think if you're interested in scouting, Joel Radkovic-Berntsson is maybe a guy that you might be interested in watching if you get the chance, because I think he is a good example of how production can be a little bit misleading. I don't mean to say he's a bad player. I think he's resilient enough and strong enough and produced enough to be worthy of considering, and if he turns into one of these sort of possession power wingers that can, fend off pressure and make plays, little easy plays around the ice and get to the net, there's nothing that says that he can't work out in the NHL. But I just feel like he's a good example of why high-producing players aren't always locked at the top of NHL draft rankings. Or I shouldn't say, he wasn't even producing a first-round pick, but I don't think he wasn't ranked enough to show up on my ranking list here. So that just goes to show that, he might be an interesting case study for that. But it's an interesting pick. We'll see where it goes. I don't have much to say about the 202nd overall pick anyway. But I do have a little bit more to say about 211th overall, where they took Linus Sjödin. who I actually like. I like Linus Shodin. I haven't seen much of him before the draft, but I watched him now after the draft, and I kind of liked what I saw. He's kind of slight on his feet, but I don't think he's small. His shot's really quick. He can get it off his stick really, really quickly. I think there's some good adaptive thinking and some good moments of skill, especially at the SHL level, which is not easy to do for even an 18-year-old like he did this year. You know, I don't think he's a particularly gifted puck transporter, and I think that's what kind of limited his game a little bit this year. And I think he's a little underdeveloped physically, but I think he's another one of these picks that indicates a clear pivot for Buffalo in a new direction here, and I'm really excited to see where it goes, where they're sort of picking up on skill and upside and potential. And I honestly also, he played a lot with Marco Kasper. Did not look bad playing with Marco Kasper in moments when I saw them playing together. So I like the Shodin pick. It's interesting, and I'm curious to see where it goes. So for the Buffalo Sabres, they're going to be the first one of the day, and I really, really liked Buffalo's draft. They're getting the 1 seed. I really, really liked their first round, probably more than anyone else, even especially when considering where their picks were. And I don't know, maybe I would have done Lenanen differently. Maybe I would have gone a little differently from Nuchev. You know, I can't really complain all that much about guys like Richard, Carlson, Burnson, and Shodin. I really like the Shodin pick as well. Komarov, if you get a minutes eater guy who can play bottom pair, then fine. I still would have liked Vladimir Gradinin at 134 for Buffalo, but such is life. You know, there might have been other things at play there, but again, past a certain point in this draft, there weren't a ton of guys where I'm going, how is this guy not drafted? How is this guy not drafted? And that includes Mats Lindgren. I wasn't surprised he slipped. I am surprised he slipped that far, but pleasantly surprised to see him also end up in Buffalo. So a lot of high upside swings for Buffalo, which I'm always a fan of, and I think they'll do pretty well looking back on this draft in a few years. So that's going to be it for Buffalo. In the next one, we're going to be looking at Washington. So we'll see you tomorrow, all my wonderful people. Okay, and so we have reached the Minnesota Wild at Scouching here for the 2022 NHL Draft Recap Series. The Minnesota Wild were quite busy on draft day. They had 8 picks, and I thought they did really well, all things considered. And that does not surprise me because Judd Brackett is leading the way there, and that guy knows what he's doing. So they picked a guy that was in my top 10 at 19 in Liam Ugren. I mean, of the 3 Djurgården boys, he was the one that I think is the most projectable to the NHL as like a good NHL player, right? Like, I think with Ugren, he's the type of player I think that when things are in crunch time and you really want to either protect a lead or grind out a win or something like that because skill and speed isn't really doing it, not that Ugren doesn't have those things, you put Liam Ugren out on the ice. I think he's a player that if he just gets a hair quicker and more fluid on his pivots with his footwork, he could be a much more physically intense player successfully than he was this year for me. He was very often involved in play, but was often one of the worst defensive rush shutdown wingers that I've tracked this year. But I don't hold that against him. I tracked a lot of him in the SHL, and at least he was trying, right? I mean, he was a very, very talented all-around hockey player, really nice shooter, really creative playmaker at times, really no nonsense at other times, really good straight line skater, gets up the ice really, really well. You know, if you don't get a guy like Marco Kasper in the draft, then Liam Ugren is a more than okay replacement in Minnesota. So I really, really like the Liam Ugren pickup. He was in my top 10 just because I looked at him and went, this is an NHL player that you can trust one day. I mean, you just know when looking at him, and I think that's a big reason why he was so productive in the junior level this year. He just, everywhere he was either, you know, physically getting through guys or physically imposing himself on guys, and can also play with skill and has some good straight line speed, beating out loose puck races and all that fun stuff. So I also felt that of the Djurgården boys, he was the most comfortable looking in the SHL, most consistently over the course of the year. So I think with him, there's a lot to like as he is now. And assuming he gets stronger and a bit quicker and just sort of keeps his style of play consistent, I think he'll be just a very, very good, maybe not super productive, but very, very good all-around NHL player. And again, they drafted a good value pick, in my view, in Danila Yurov at 24. I had Yurov ranked a little lower than average. I thought he would go later than my tracked average ranking of 14.8. I thought he would go a little later than that. That just felt, based on what I had seen of him at the KHL level especially, just a little bit out there. But I didn't have him much later. I had him at 16, and getting him at 24 I think is a really good bet. I honestly thought he was going to go to Washington at 20, but I mean, Yurov is a really, really, again, well-rounded player. He's really smart. He's got a pretty good shot. He's a really simple but creative playmaker in the offensive zone. You know, maybe not the most defensively intense guy you're going to find, but just reads the game really well. You know, knows how to create just enough space from guys so that he can sort of make a play. The problem for me is that once he was in the KHL, all of that kind of dried up, and he was much less effective. And, you know, he was good off puck, finding scoring chances, and I think that there were some situations where, if you want to count what I would call like almost points, he does that. He did that a few times in the games I saw in the KHL, where it just, if things had gone, you know, flip a coin, and if it came up tails, but if it come up heads, he would have a goal or an assist, and that happened a couple of times. So, and it's why I don't really worry myself too much with KHL production with guys this young. But I also look at Yurov and think, okay, if I'm a KHL coach, I can see why I'm not playing him, you know, more than the bare minimum that I have to, because he's not really moving the needle at that level and needs other guys to sort of help him out. But that's not a dig at Danila Yurov. I think he's a really well-rounded and smart player, and just the better he gets, pretty much across the board, he's a nice blank slate to work with a really good sort of hockey mind. And I think for Minnesota, like, as well as Liam Ogren, like, they get two really well-rounded wingers that they can work with over the next little while. At 47, they took Hunter Height. Now, I didn't have Hunter Height ranked because I don't really trust myself to know better than NHL teams when it comes to how far they think a player can come in a relatively quick period of time. Because I watched Hunter Height this year, and yes, he's got a very gifted set of hands. He's very sort of shifty and creative and evasive, but he's not really doing much with it. Or at least when I watched him with Barrie this year and I tracked a few games, he wasn't really doing a whole lot with it. I'll pull up his track data here just to show you. So again, I didn't track a ton of Hunter Height, but I did stop because I kind of figured out I was kind of looking at a player where I just wasn't the biggest fan. Just across the board, everything was just very mediocre. If you have an offensive threat of 14 at the OHL level, like, that's not very notable. Not passing the puck a whole lot, but completing his passes decently well. You know, when he got involved in defensive transitions, he was pretty good at breaking up those pucks, and I feel like he does have a bit of stick skill in terms of the defensive side of the game as well. I mean, I think that with his hands and the creativity that he did show once in a while with the puck on his stick, I think he could be one of these guys that pops next year in the OHL after missing last season. I mean, I don't know. I did track a little bit of Height at the end of the year, and I just don't know how to honestly evaluate players who lost a season the year before and still haven't quite got back to game shape when it's like 6 or 7 months into the season. You know, is that just the player is a year behind everyone else? How big of a factor is that? I don't really know. And maybe this is a situation where when I don't have Hunter Height ranked and in 3 years he's in the NHL scoring 80 points, I go, okay, like, there's other stuff that I just don't know and probably can't really identify, at least when situations like the COVID season being lost happens. But Hunter Height, I think, of the OHL guys, like, he's got some of the more talented hands and creativity with the puck that I think you'll find out of the guys that weren't in that top group. I would have drafted someone else that high, but it's not the end of the world, I don't think. But I think that Minnesota could have aimed a little higher than taking a chance on Hunter Height. But I'll trust Judd Brackett. They may have very, very specific information where they think he's going to, you know, really take off next year, and I think that's possible. At 56, they took Ryger Lorenz, which is literally right where he was kind of ranked on average. I had him a little lower, but this is a decent range for possible. But it's not the end of the world, I don't think, but I think that Minnesota could have aimed a little higher than taking a chance on Hunter Height. But I'll trust Judd Brackett. They may have very, very specific information where they think he's going to, you know, really take off next year, and I think that's possible. At 56, they took Ryger Lorenz, which is literally right where he was kind of ranked on average. I had him a little lower, But this is a decent range for Lorenz. Again, I think in this 40 to 65 range, there was a lot of really good players that sort of slipped through the cracks. To me, Ryger Lorenz was not one of them. Like, I feel like he'll be an NHL player. He's very resilient on the puck, really strong moving pucks up the ice himself. You know, just a kind of a really good straight line, hard-nosed guy. Again, he's another one of these guys where when he went to the U18s, I'm going, okay, this is his chance, right? This U18 team, without all these guys that they could have, Ryger Lorenz is going to get a ton of ice time. We'll see what he can do, and that team just could not get anything done. And watching Ryger Lorenz, a lot of people were talking about his production and stuff all year long, and I just did not see that really projecting super well. And at the U18s, you kind of see why. Like, he's big and strong and resilient, but he doesn't really problem solve super well. The skill level's not quite there yet. He's not the quickest guy in the world, just a big, strong dude who can get up the ice and sort of power his way through the game. We'll see how it goes. I mean, there are players in the NHL that can do that, and at 56, I think he's acceptable. Again, there just were other higher upside guys that I think I would have swung on if I were the Minnesota Wild. But I understand also that there are some philosophical differences that I've picked up on between myself and how this team drafts, because as much as I see a lot of the same things that they see, there's also other stuff that I think I either devalue or miss, which happens. But at 89, they drafted Mikey Milne, and I know for a fact that he was going to get drafted, and I figured, you know, there was one team specifically that told me, like, if he's available later on, we're drafting him, and I feel like that was the case with a few teams, and so Minnesota just said, we're just going to do it. Of the re-entry guys, I think he was one of the better ones out there, and I think that, yes, he is a bit on the older side, but I think he could be perhaps ready for an AHL job, but maybe going back for an overage year with Winnipeg might make sense. You know, he's creative and he's quick and agile. You know, he doesn't really have a ton of like separation speed, but he's quick enough where I think he can make it work at the junior level. I really have come to like Mikey Milne after watching him the last 2 seasons. I thought he would get drafted last year, but, you know, his sample was a little strange last year, but I thought he was worth taking a chance on. But here, I'm pleasantly surprised to see him drafted this high. I don't think there's massive NHL upside, but he's an undersized but skilled and agile little guy. And I think that there's, you know, he's a hard-working player as well, and I think that could take him a ways with the Minnesota Wild. So we'll see where he goes. At 121, Ryan Healy was actually one of the more sort of in my back pocket, like, this guy's kind of neat kind of players of the year. Like, I have been watching Ryan Healy for 2 years after watching him with Sioux Falls last year, I believe. When I was watching Brent Johnson, Ryan Healy kind of caught my eye quite a few times. But I've always wondered why he doesn't score more. And because he's got the hands, he's got the sort of confident ability to sort of step up from the blue line, deceive play in the neutral zone with the puck, and sort of play around in creative ways, and I just haven't seen it project into goal scoring or production to say of any kind this year. But he did produce more as the year went on, I believe. The first half he was kind of slow in terms of scoring, but his second half seemed a little bit better. I don't know. At 121, that's, I mean, again, at 121 there weren't that many guys I would have really been pounding the table for, but if you really want to bet on his skill level and the fluidity on his feet and the confidence he's got, then absolutely, I think you can do that. So Healy, you know, in my track data didn't really show extraordinarily well, but you could see in the tape and in the video that there was something there with Healy that's worth sort of expanding on. At 153, they took David Spacek, who I've seen off and on over the course of the year. People were telling me to check him out and everything. I do see, again, kind of like that Ryan Healy vibe, where there's creativity, stepping up from the blue line, making plays. All that stuff, you know, is kind of there, but I'm not sure of how it projects. I think with Spacek, you send him back to junior for a year, see where he is, and maybe you loan him back to Czechia next 2 years from now, or maybe you bring him to the AHL or something, but I don't really have high hopes for Spacek, considering the quality of play in the queue and how defensemen can find ways to produce there. But he's a nice, well-rounded guy that when I watched him after the draft, I'm going, all right, I can see why he got drafted. There's some deception and skill and sort of good footwork, but how good it will be down the road, we'll see. Servac Petrovsky was their last pick of the draft, and I was really surprised to see Servac Petrovsky fall that low. Like, he's a really hard-working guy, sort of puts his head down and goes to work a lot of times on the ice when I watched him. He's shifty, maybe not the most skilled or the most agile guy, but he's kind of wired to be that. It seems like that's kind of how he's wired, with a bit of physical sort of resilience in there as well. And that's kind of the thread and the common element between Minnesota Wild draft picks. They seem to like these guys who can evade pressure or manage pressure pretty well. And Petrovsky, I think, does that. So I think Servac Petrovsky is a really good swing to take in the late rounds of the draft. I mean, I wasn't so overwhelmed with him. Like, he was ranked on average at 95th, and a lot of people sort of had him kind of higher than 185 in the draft. But I saw him as a watch list guy for me. It's like, look, if he's a late round swing that you take and he's really young, I think you can bet on that, and I think the production is good enough, even though a lot of it was on the power play from what I can recall. I think there's a lot to like with Petrovsky, and who knows where he'll be in a few years. He's young, you've got runway, and I like the sort of way that his game is wired, so we'll see where he ends up. So, the Minnesota Wild, also, I thought it was a really, really strong draft from Minnesota. Again, another one. So they're getting a 1C that puts them way up at the top here. Do I like it more than Winnipeg's draft? I think so. I think I do. Do I like it more than Buffalo's draft? That's a toss-up, but considering they didn't have a top 10 pick and got a guy that I had in the top 10, I'll put them a shade above Buffalo. I thought Yurov was a great pickup. I thought Ogren was a great pickup for where they got him. I would have taken different guys in the second round over Height and Lorenz, and that's probably what holds them back from a 1B. But Milne, Healy, and Petrovsky as your last three of your last four picks, great. And if there's something I'm missing with David Spacek, I'll take the L, and it's at 153rd overall. But Spacek has some decent traits as well. So, you know, being a little nitpicky in the second round, I think Minnesota could have nailed this draft into space. But you know, not everything goes the way I want it to go, because that's life, to quote Tommy Wiseau. So yeah, but I thought it was a really, really, really strong draft from Minnesota, and maybe Hunter Height does have a pop-off season next year. Maybe Ryger Lorenz becomes a great bottom six, third-line NHL forward. So we'll see what happens, but again, a really, really strong draft from Minnesota. So that's it for this one. The next one we're going to be doing will be Pittsburgh, so we'll see you tomorrow for that one.
Hello and welcome to Scouching's 2021 NHL Draft Ranking Special. We've made it through 21 scouting reports for the 2021 draft, countless live streams, and we're not quite done, but this will be the last produced video that will appear on this channel for a little while. And I felt that we kind of needed to grow up in this show a little bit from the birthday party kind of themes from the last two seasons, so I decided to class up the affair a little bit, lose the sweater, enjoy the warm July weather here in southern Ontario, and pull out a nice glass of fine wild turkey bourbon. It's got a lovely nose that feels like it's punching you right in your amygdala. Yep. And the taste certainly follows suit as well. Trust me, I'm enjoying this. So for the purposes of this video, I'm only going to be going through my top 4 tiers, which encompasses my top 31, which is the majority of the picks in the first round this season. The rest of my rankings can be found in an accompanying written piece that will be found at scouching.ca, so click the link in the description if you want to read that. So to start this video, I do want to preface things by saying that I'm not the kind of person to look at a group of hockey players being drafted and just labeling them as unlikely to turn out as something special or just plain bad overall. But I will also say that in this year's draft specifically, I don't really see anybody as a potentially real elite game changer for an NHL franchise, but I do feel that the high-end group in this year's draft has strengths and weaknesses, and if those strengths grow in the next few years and those weaknesses get mitigated, you could end up with a draft class that really outperforms some people's expectations here. At the same time, those players have weaknesses, and if those weaknesses don't get patched, they might not become what you think they might be. There's a lot of those guys this year but it could mean that this draft might be one we look back on where we kinda might have missed the mark by saying it's bad on draft day. But as always, all that does is indicate to me the importance of awareness of a player's strengths and weaknesses from a concrete standpoint, and what your developmental pathway with that player could be. So in case you're unaware, the way that I rank players isn't really super focused on the exact numerical order of the players. I group players into tiers, where I feel that they are in a legitimate group of players that could be all around the same level of role in the NHL if things go right, and the numerical order is just a matter of preference with how I might push for them on draft day, but I could totally understand the other names in that tier being presented as potential options. There is absolutely a lot of uncertainty in this work, and I do also think that the players that you surround your picks with can also make or break their career through no fault of their own, especially getting started in the National Hockey League. And just before we get into the tiers, I do also want to briefly encapsulate my overall philosophy as to what I'm looking for in NHL potential prospects. And I tend to value players who in their youth show signs of speed, pace, ability to combine speed and skill at a high pace of play to make plays or try to shoot shot attempts for themselves, selfless play with the puck, not holding on to it for too long and utilizing line mates effectively in intelligent ways. And when you're faced with pressure, how do you react? Are you physically resilient? Do you try to evade that pressure with skill? Do you try to evade it with speed? Do you try to just blow through physical pressure at junior levels? All of these things I think are the biggest keys to projecting NHL success with young players. And a lot of players might excel in some areas but not others, or almost all of them and maybe not one, or some might not stand out in those categories right now, but you can see signs that they might. Like I said, there's a lot of uncertainty in this work, but those are the general tenets that I'm trying to look for in a young player. And picking one player over the other sometimes might just come down to a gut feeling with how they interview. And to me, that doesn't sound very analytical, but that can make the difference between a player that seems like a fit in your organization and a player that fans cannot imagine that you could possibly pass on in an NHL draft. And while I'm an analytics guy, I love to see great results, but I am much more interested in how those results are generated. And that is largely what I focus my work on, with the results just sort of being a bonus. So before we get into the actual tiers here, I also did want to go into some players that are ranked very highly on some boards that I track, that are not going to be featured in this video because I just don't have them ranked nearly as high. So we're going to start with Zach Bolduc of the Rimouski Oceanique in the Quebec Major Junior Hockey League, and I've really tried with this guy. I really have. Over the course of this entire season, he seemed a bit fishy to me as a first-round potential prospect right from the get-go, and I really had trouble seeing anything that really showcased him as a first-round pick to me. He was a player that in my tracking data was extremely passive defensively, one of the worst suppressors of defensive transitions, far more often to be a receiver of passes in the neutral zone at high pace rather than a strong back checker who can chip in defensively. And I also caught him on far too many occasions just chasing physical play that was a little bit too far beyond just pushing the envelope. He was a player that would raise his elbows on a few instances of potential physical contact, hide out in a player's blind spot from time to time and look for physical contact that could potentially be unsafe. And when it did come time for him to play with the puck at 5-on-5, I just didn't see enough projectable skill or offensive creation on enough of a consistent basis that really puts him in the first round for me no matter which way I slice it. And the last thing I'll note is that I looked at some of the data and it really felt that some of his production really seemed to take off after a dynamic 200-foot high-energy player with some skill came to town in Rimouski in Xavier Cormier. Now, I wouldn't draft Xavier Cormier, but he is a player that I think I would invite to a camp and see what he could do on a pro setting. I felt that that was a player who was doing a lot of the legwork, and Zach Bolduc was kind of there participating in offense as well. There's some redeeming qualities to his game, but this is just a guy that missed the cut for me. The next is Brennan Othman, and this is a player that I've seen ranked pretty high in the first round, and I do understand kind of why from a he can be a hockey player perspective, but I really just haven't seen a whole lot that really moves the needle for me. Yes, he's got a great shot, and he does already seem to have a bit of an office right around the goal mouth at the side of the net where he likes to try to bang pucks in from there. And I do see nice straight line agility out of him, and he does move his feet relatively quickly and can be deceptive with it. His ability to generate speed with that quickness is not necessarily there right now, but he is a physical presence who puts in the work, but I've just never felt that he has quite the upside that I look for in a potential first round pick. Is he going to go in the first round? I think so. Is he going to be an NHL player? I could see him as sort of a bottom 6 guy, maybe a trigger man on a secondary power play here and there. But at the end of the day, there's just other players that he just kind of was bumped down by over the course of this season. And the last one I want to cover is Corson Ceulemans. Now, he just missed the cut for this video, and I do see some varying opinions on him that I do buy with regards to how I might be undervaluing him. I like his straight line speed. He's got great skill to step up in the offensive zone from the blue line and has a really nice wrist shot to take when he does step up. But I'm just skeptical of when pace gets ratcheted up around him that he's going to really round his game out as much as other defensemen in that similar range. His lateral gap control can be a question mark. His backward skating mobility and agility and raw speed is kind of a question mark as well. It just felt that if he couldn't pick play off by skating in a straight line, his defensive effectiveness was a little bit mitigated, and that was at the AJHL level. I think if you give him some time to develop in college, sure, there could be an interesting defenseman here, but again, I'm looking for a lot of upside that is objectively clear right from the time that I'm watching them, and I didn't see a heck of a lot of that out of Ceulemans, whether it was in the AJHL or at the under-18s this year. And I just get the gut feeling that he's going to be a defender that is gone way before I'd be ready to take him, and I'd be more than happy to snag a name like, say, Brent Johnson or Olin Zellweger later in the draft, who are guys that I also kind of believe in almost more than I do Corson Ceulemans. So with all of that out of the way, let's look at Tier 4. Now, I'm just gonna say it. This area of the draft for me is a complete mess, and I have no idea what to think. Getting a specific numeric order from top to bottom here that I'm comfortable with is physically impossible. I've tried for months and I just can't quite get it. This is why I do things in tiers. But it's a group of players that I think could be perfectly useful players all around your lineup in a varying level of roles, who may be relatively raw but have very strong fundamentals, or perhaps players that I think are held back by really heavy inconsistency, but if you want to bet on what you see in a player when they're at their best, you may as well draft one of those guys. It's just a mishmash of a whole bunch of different question mark players with regards to how they project to the NHL, how much of an impact they'll have in the NHL, or if their development will even come along enough and gain enough consistency to be anything in the NHL in the first place. But if they do, you might have something interesting. And to me, the best example in this group of a player where you can kind of tell what they're going to be in the NHL, but you're not sure how much they're going to move the needle at the end of the day, is Oskar Olausson from HV71 in Sweden. There's skill, there's intensity, he can apply pressure away from the puck really well, especially once I saw him in the SHL, and he's got intelligence and patience when the puck is on his stick, and he has a really good sense of how to wait out defenders and look for new passing lanes. But since he left the junior levels, a lot of offensive areas of the game and just the amount of times he touched the puck completely cratered, and that even continued, and more so in the Allsvenskan when I tracked him. He wasn't getting the puck very often, and even when he did get the puck, I found that he wasn't really doing a whole lot with it. But I do like the hallmarks of his game that I did see in spurts here and there, and especially in the junior levels in Sweden. Is there a top 6 player here? I'm not so sure. But he's pretty solid on his feet, he's skilled, he's big, he applies physical pressure, and I think just through that, there might be an NHL player maybe in a bottom 6 role one day. The next player is a player that encapsulates that idea of a player with strong, raw fundamentals, but really unclear lineup potential and questionable projectability, and to me that's Airton Martino. His pass vision, his vision to make a play in open ice, the quality of his shot, and the raw offensive output with him is a ton of fun to watch. He is one of the more exciting offensive-leaning players that I've tracked this year, and he is one of the craftiest and most patient and intelligent playmakers outside of the top group that I think I've come across this season. There will definitely, though, need to be some improvements to his agility and the pace of his game, especially as he gets older against more difficult competition, and that's going to be necessary to maximize what I believe he could be, and if he puts all those things together, look out. I think Airton Martino could be a great get for an NHL team, even if he slips past the first round. He would be a great low-risk second-round pick. If you miss, you miss. But I do really think that there is a really exciting offensive player here that could make pretty much any team more dangerous offensively. And if you want to talk about a player in that latter group where you just really wish a more consistent version of them would come out, but if you want to bet on them at their best, you may as well just pick them, the best example to me of that is William Strömgren. And William Strömgren, based on what he is at his best, could be a guy that's gone long before where I have him ranked. I really think that this guy could be high on certain teams' draft boards based on the skill and size package that he brings. He's done some things in the Allsvenskan against professional competition where I just haven't seen the same kind of finesse out of anyone in this draft playing professional hockey. He can disappear into the background for long stretches of a game, but when he does pull out his bag of tricks and gets a good head of steam going and attacks the opponent, he's a ton of fun to watch. He is an exciting, skilled winger with a nice combination of size and smarts and speed. I think there's an interesting player with Strömgren. Maybe he's not a guy that goes in the first round, but I think the right team could snag him early. The next name I want to go over is Francesco Pinelli, and I haven't said a whole lot about my thoughts on Francesco Pinelli because I don't know what to think with him. It's been really hard to get a good read on him this year. He went to play in the Slovenian Professional League, and whatever you do, don't watch that league. It's not great. It was really hard to watch him play there, and I didn't really feel like he was super comfortable in that league, and that might have just been the fact that it was one of the first few games he was playing over there, so we'll set that aside. The majority of games I saw, he was playing in the Alps Hockey League, and there I did feel he got better and better as time went on. I do see a lot of smarts with his puck possession especially. He can be physical away from the puck, and that did come out a little bit more. He applies pressure to opponents, and when he does get the puck back, if he has some open space to work with, he can be creative, use line mates selflessly, and make a play in the offensive zone with real no-nonsense playmaking. But the pace of his game is pretty low. He didn't shoot the lights out in a league like the Alps Hockey League, which is not the best professional league in Europe, and I just felt like he was one of those players where he wasn't really moving the needle a whole lot for as smart as he is. I think there's an interesting potential maybe bottom six guy here. He can play center, he can play the wing. There's nice versatility to his game, but on my list, there were some higher upside names that might be a little riskier that I did enjoy a lot more, and I think it just bumped Pinelli a little bit down my list to this range, but I would expect some team to pick him up based on his smarts and try to build his game around that. Next up we go to Carson Lambos, and I think Carson Lambos is kind of the black sheep of this year's draft. He was a very highly regarded prospect coming out of last season, and it did not take very long for people to watch him playing in Finland to go, maybe this isn't the top-ranked guy we all thought he was. I was part of that group, to be perfectly honest, and at a certain point in this year, I had him ranked pretty low on my list. But of any player where I've gone back and watched the tape that I have clipped of them, and I've sat back and gone, I might need to rethink this player a little bit, it was Carson Lambos. Yes, in Finland, he wasn't spectacular. He really should have taken over games more often than he did if he really is a top 10 NHL prospect. But I'm not going to rake a kid over the coals who traveled to Finland, playing with a group of players that he's never played with before, in a professional system that really struggled at the men's level, and really expecting him to be 100% of the player that he is. I liked his ability to close gaps out in the neutral zone and at least pressure defensive rushes really effectively skating backwards. He's got decent evasive skill to create new passing lanes. He took good care of the puck when he was moving it around the offensive zone. He created plenty of shot attempts as well. And while I did track a game of his in the Liga, and it did expose a lot of weaknesses in his game, especially when it comes to generating speed in a straight line and puck pursuit in defensive scenarios in the defensive end, he was playing against men in the Liga, and it's an interesting tightrope to walk. I don't know what's going to happen with him on draft day, but I did come away thinking that he was a player that certainly belonged in this range of the draft. And if he's available as a late first round pick and you think that there might be more to grow into based on what you saw last season, yeah, you could do a lot worse in the first round of this year's draft to me than Carson Lambos. Continuing down the alley of those William Strömgren type of players, Nikita Chibrikov is in this range. And there were moments this year where I looked at Nikita Chibrikov and tracked games of him and went, yeah, this guy's a top 20 pick, probably even top 15. But then I would watch more of him and sort of sit back and go, okay, you got to do something. I didn't see much out of Nikita Chibrikov where often enough across an entire game, he was really pushing the game in the right direction. If the puck was on his stick and he had some open ice to work with, certainly. He's a ton of fun to watch. But you do not get that luxury in the NHL very often. And I did not really see a whole lot of him being super effective away from the puck. But towards the end of the year, when he was in the KHL a little bit, I did see a bit of that coming out, and he was applying physical pressure well. I thought he was good at the under 18s, so he's a bit of a wild card with regards to what he's gonna be, but I do think there's an interesting skilled player there that with patience and time with SKA's development program could turn into a really interesting skilled offensive player for an NHL team. Is he going to be available in the late first? I think it's possible, maybe not super likely, but all it takes is for him to be just the second guy on teams' lists a few times in a row, and he could slip 5 or 10 picks here or there. The last name I want to cover in Tier 4 is Chaz Lucius. Now, Chaz Lucius is another one of these really hard players to get a read on. He spent a lot of this season injured, he missed the under-18s, but I felt that every time I watched him with the NDDP this year, he got better and better. The question marks I have with his game is I would want to find out if his injury was factoring into the lack of pace that he showed in his game this season, and if he was taking things just a little bit easier to avoid re-injuring his knee, because in my data, he was one of the least active defensive players that I've tracked, especially for a forward. But on the plus side, he is a player who, when the puck is on his stick, is fantastic at finding little pockets of space under pressure, getting himself scoring chances, and just grinding the puck into the front of the net to try to make a play of some kind. To me, I feel like he's a bit more of a James Van Riemsdyk style scorer in the NHL rather than one of those Alex Ovechkin or Steven Stamkos guys who's just going to crank slap shots from the faceoff dot all day. But goals are goals, and if you're in the right place at the right time, a goal is a goal. And that was Chaz Lucius a lot of times this year. If you can find little pockets of space and deceive goalies based on having them not know when a shot is coming, that can lead to a goal as well. And if he's picked at 12th overall because teams have good intel that say, well, he was underperforming his potential all season because he was coming back from injury, I would totally believe it. If your team drafts him much higher than I have him ranked, it's not the end of the world. He's an interesting wild card to bet on, and I think there is decent upside here, especially if he continues to build on his mobility and that knee stays healthy. I may question how much of his scoring will translate, but he's scoring a lot, and I think that that also matters as well. So moving to Tier 3, I think these players have the potential to likely become useful complementary pieces for an NHL team with signs of potential for something more, with a lot of upside that might be worth betting on. And to start, my thoughts on Matthew Coronato are well articulated. It took me a long time to really appreciate what he brings to the game, but I am a fan of what he brings, and I think he will be an NHL player of some kind, with the upside for something more, really, that could be unlocked just by virtue of making him a better skater over time. I don't think coaches will mind playing Coronato with the smarts that he brings, the skill under pressure, the resilience that he brings as well when he is facing that pressure, and his knack for both scoring goals and setting them up in the offensive zone. I don't think he's going to score in the NHL as much as he has with the Chicago Steel, but I could see him being a very valuable forward for an NHL team, if not the flashiest one, that can play the wing but has potential as a center in the NHL down the road. Moving forward from Matthew Coronato, we go to Logan Stankoven. Rest assured, if I could, I would have made a scouting report on Logan Stankoven. I just didn't have enough data, but the data that I did track is just spectacular. It's wonderful. There's so much to like. His dangerous shot attempt percentage was 80%. The number of dangerous passes per 60 minutes he was sending to the front of the net was 21, which is amongst the best I've ever tracked. He had 15 individual dangerous shot attempts per 60, which is also just great. He maintained control on 78.7% of his offensive transitions and completed 3/4 of his passes. All those things put together, he was one of the most devastating offensive players I tracked. Yes, he's small, and the level of involvement in transition going both directions was underwhelming, especially in the defensive zone, but I do think the work rate and all-around offensive talent that he brings is going to take him really far. I've seen him ranked outside the first round, and if he's available in that range, you just shut up and take him. You just take him and thank me later. He's a great player with a ton of potential, and the only real limitation is his size, but he battles through that pretty well as he is. Next we go to Cole Sillinger. Now, I've bumped him up my list a little bit since putting out my scouting report because I've reflected a little bit on how his negatives were really impacted by him rather than Sioux Falls as a whole. I get the feeling that there's more to like about Cole Sillinger than not to like, and I think that his game in Medicine Hat is more the real Cole Sillinger we're going to get moving forward, and if that's the case, I think I was undervaluing him a little bit. His skill under pressure and the quality of his shot and the growing level of physical involvement away from the puck are really promising traits to work on. And I think at the very least he could be a devastating power play winger with strong 5-on-5 upside as a 200-foot guy that can shoot the lights out. Flipping the script a little bit, sometimes I go back to old scouting reports and really think if I've overvalued those guys a little bit just because they were the first ones where I had a full data set. And with Fyodor Svechkov, I've done that a few times this year, and nah, he's still really good. I really think that he's in a nice spot on my list here where I'd be more than happy to add him and let him develop with SKA St. Petersburg. Just by virtue of getting away from Lada Togliatti, I think he'll have more offensive weapons to deal with that can really help him boost up that production. He's dynamic and crafty and so smart both with and without the puck that I just really like what he brings to the table. He may be a bit of a slow burn, but if teams kind of forget about him a little bit and let him slip a pick here and there, and he ends up towards the back end of the 10s range or towards 20th overall, a team in that range could end up with a really interesting pickup to let develop over in Russia. Next we're going to go to Tier 2. And in this tier, all of the defensemen except Luke Hughes are here, and we'll get to those in a second. But this group of players to me are players that I think will be useful core pieces that might not have the likelihood of being the best players to come out of this year's draft, but it is not impossible for them to do so. It's just, to me, less likely than the guys ahead of them. For starters, we're going to talk about Aatu Räty, and I am still a very big believer in what Aatu Räty is capable of. I think this is a player that has only been limited by being in a prison of his own mental expectations for himself. I really get the feeling that once the draft is in his hindsight, he'll turn into a better player once that pressure is alleviated from him. I think the right team could turn him into a fantastic two-way forward. He's got great offensive transition control, really good speed and skill combinations for a guy his size, and I think there's a lot to work with his game. I think you just need to get on his level, reset him mentally, and just get him in the right headspace to really maximize his potential, because I think there's a lot there, and I think he deserves someone to give him a chance, especially if you've made a trade and landed a second first-round pick. I feel like if Räty's the guy that's slipping through this draft, you may as well take a flyer and see what happens and really believe in him, because I think he deserves that chance. Next we're going to talk about Dylan Guenther, and I found his under 18 to be fine, I suppose, but I do think it exposed some of the questions that I had about him going into the under 18s with regards to his pace of play and his raw foot speed ability and ability to generate offense at high pace. When the game is played at his comfortable pace, he's brilliant. He's a great playmaker. He's a volume shooter from all around the offensive zone, which might be a bit of an issue for me, but I do think there's an interesting complementary top 6 player here down the road. Would I take him as high as 3rd or 4th overall like I've seen on some boards? No, I don't think so, but I do think it's possible that he is just the guy that slips in this year's draft a little bit to that 9, 10, 11th, or 12th overall range because other guys might just jump ahead of him at the last minute, and he could be a really tidy, nice pickup for a team that could just use another complementary offensive piece. And next we talk about Mason McTavish. Now, I will grant right away that Mason McTavish has been probably the most improved player to my eye based on last year through this season, but I still struggle to see Mason McTavish as a legitimate top 5 pick in this year's draft, although I've kind of grown to accept that that's what's going to happen. And I can see why. There is certainty with his profile. He's physical, he's got skill, he's a good perimeter playmaker as well.
Hey Canucks fans, Andrei Kuzmenko and Ilya Mikheyev took the ice wearing Canucks uniforms for the very first time today, and I admit, I'm pretty darn excited. I'm Canuck Clay, and this is my Canucks Take All in One Take. It's Clay's Canucks commentary for Monday, August the 22nd. If you're new, here's what you should do. Hit the subscribe button now for daily Canucks insight that's positive, timely, and trustworthy. Thanks to everyone who joined me for my live stream last night, the one that I had to restart due to a family issue, but all is good. Everything is fine, and I appreciate that all of you were indeed with me last night. And don't forget to join Parker and me tonight, 10 p.m. for our regular Monday night show, Canucks After Dark. We actually may have some things to talk about, or at least a couple things. And in particular, today, exactly 1 day before, 1 month before training camp. That was a long way of saying training camp opens training camp opens a month from tomorrow on September the 23rd in Whistler. That's when training camp is going to start. Today is August 22nd. So in 1 month and a day from now, training camp will open in Whistler. Prior to that, of course, there's a Young Stars tournament in Penticton and then the Jake Milford golf tournament. But yes, training camp opens on September 23rd in Whistler, and it will feature, among the many new players, 2 that we saw on the ice today. So the Canucks tweeted a few tweets, one with each of them introducing themselves, a couple of highlight packages, and then a tweet with 4 pictures. And Canucks fans are excited. I'm excited. I think we are starving for some content here. Not just me as a content creator, it obviously helps, but I think Canucks fans can't wait for this season to get going because of the promise that this team showed for the last 2/3 of last season. Also the promise of all these new players, at least new forwards coming in, and the hope for a playoff type season. That's what we're all excited for. So I think any type of footage gets Canucks fans excited. Well, I can't speak for all Canucks fans, but I saw the reaction on Twitter, and I know when I saw the footage, the videos, the photos, I got excited as well. And it wasn't even the full team. It was two guys that haven't even played for the team yet, but there's been a lot of hoopla around these two players. Both Russians. The first one, Andrei Kuzmenko, wearing number 96. By the way, both Kuzmenko and Mikheyev, they said hello Canucks fans, and they introduced themselves in their, using their own native tongue in their Russian. They spoke English, but they pronounced their names probably how they should be pronounced. Just like I always say, people gotta know my name's Clay Emo and not Clay Imu or Emu. So they pronounced their names properly. There's no way I'm gonna get it right. So now maybe I shouldn't, get mad when people mess up my name. So I'm gonna call them Kuzmenko and Mikheyev. I think with Kuzmenko, it's closer to what he said. With Mikheyev, he said it so fast, I'm not sure what he said, but I know it was him because of the number he was wearing. So Kuzmenko, number 96, right shot forward. We know that with him, he's not afraid to get his nose dirty around the nets. With him, he's good along the boards. He has a strong hockey IQ. He was the most highly sought after, non-NHL free agent, if that makes sense. And we got excited when in June it came out that the Canucks were going to be the favorites. We're the favorites to indeed land him, and they confirmed that they signed him. So Kuzmenko was on the ice today. Saw a lot of great footage of him with his great release, his good skating, and overall he looked extremely happy to be here. So I think he's going to be great. I think he's going to quickly become a fan favorite for this team. I'm not going to put any expectations or any predictions on his performance in this video. We still have a month and a half to do that. So that was the first one, as Andrei Kuzmenko wearing number 96, also worn by Pavel Bure, of course, and Adam Gaudette. And then wearing Michael DiPietro's old number 65, you had another Russian forward, and this is Ilya Mikheyev. Mikheyev was signed as a free agent coming from the Toronto Maple Leafs. We signed him to a 4-year contract. Yes, it's a bit of money, a bit more than some people maybe would have liked, but he is going to bring a couple of elements that we simply do not have on this team. And we also saw it a little bit. It's tough to see against no competition, no defense, but we saw Mikheyev's speed on the clips that we saw today and his good shot as well. And with Mikheyev, so he's not as big, he's not as sturdy as, say, Kuzmenko is, but he's a lot faster, and he's going to be a tenacious penalty killer as well. So his speed, doesn't have the best hands, but he's got good speed. At least he'll get open, and then his penalty killing is going to be a big, big benefit to the Vancouver Canucks. So again, Mikheyev was wearing number 65. He also looked happy to be here skating with his fellow countrymen. And, there's 4 new forwards basically that we can look at. So 1/3 of the Canucks forwards corps that will likely be revised, and that is, of course, is Kuzmenko, Mikheyev, and then you have Curtis Lazar and Dakota Joshua. But I'd say these two are going to be the more flashy of the new forwards, whereas Lazar and Joshua will be 3rd and 4th line type players, where I expect Kuzmenko to play in the top 6 for sure, and Mikheyev could be anywhere in the top 9. So it's great to see them on the ice, and I think the point of this is it just gets you excited. Seeing players, whether new or old, in the Canucks practice uniform, on the ice, shooting on goaltenders, doing drills, it means that we are slowly creeping towards the start of the regular season. Before that, of course, we went through training camp and preseason, as I mentioned. So that was good. That was exciting, and I think it's good. The Canucks social media team, as always, did a bang-on job of getting people excited and showing some really good clips and capitalizing on the excitement around this team right now. One other tidbit I wanted to share is Rick Dhaliwal spoke to the head coach of the Swedish World Junior team, that Sweden team that did not play in the gold medal. Of course, that was Canada and Finland, but they won the bronze medal. And in particular, of course, the Canucks prospect that we're all interested in, Jonathan Lekkerimäki. He was drafted 15th overall by the Canucks. Ended up the tournament with 3 assists, no goals. But his coach said that he played okay. Didn't give him a rave review, didn't say he was bad, just said he was okay, said he's got a lot to work on, acknowledged that he's young, acknowledged that he's going to have to play better